Hi, thanks for joining me again today. I'm Gary Zacharias. You're listening to the Apologist Bookshelf. This will be a continuation of the look that we started last time at Kenneth Samples and Mark Perez's book called Clear Thinking in a Messy World. It's a Christian guide to logic, reason, and cognitive bias. And as I was saying last time, we are in a world right now that doesn't honor these things very much and doesn't understand them very well. So I think it's crucially important, even if we're not ourselves involved in argumentation or supporting our beliefs on the internet or wherever we find ourselves, it's valuable, I think, to at least know what's going on out there, how people are often trying to manipulate others through some of these devices. So last time we took a look at some fallacies. That's chapter 9 of the book, and I didn't get all the way finished with 9, so I want to continue with some more fallacies that are 9 and actually continue into chapter 10 as well. So what we covered last time were 4 of the real big ones: the ad hominem fallacies, the attack that aims at the person rather than their argument. It's mudslinging, it's name-calling. And then the second was the appeal to people. So the kind of the bandwagon effect. Hey, get on board. Everybody believes it. Why don't you? The third one was dealing with an unqualified authority. We see that so often these days. And it may be a person who's actually very knowledgeable with several degrees, but they're used as an authority outside of their field of understanding. And so they will end up saying some foolish things. Then the fourth one is called begging the question, or called circular reasoning, where you're assuming the answer to be what was in your premise to start with, so you didn't prove anything. So those are the 4. Then I'm going to skip ahead here to do a couple, 4 or 5 more, depending on time. Here's a big one. It's called the hasty generalization fallacy. So what's going on there? You're drawing a general conclusion from some sample that's too small. It's inadequate. So it might be just the sample size or whatever, but you're making it erroneous by coming up with a conclusion about a huge group based on a very small size. So here's some examples. I've met 3 redheads. They're all hard to get along with. I guess all redheads are tough to get along with. Really? You're basing that on 3 people? How about this one? I've known several evangelical Christians personally, and they were all judgmental and unkind. I guess all Christians are that way. Well, it's unfortunate. There probably really are some judgmental, unkind ones, but boy, I hate for us to all to be tarred with that idea. Here's a third one. Scientists Richard Dawkins, Peter Atkins, Lawrence Krauss, Sean Carroll, they're all outspoken atheists, so I guess the whole scientific community is full of atheists. That's all they are. Well, that's not true at all. In fact, they've done some studies to show there are as many theists as there were 100 years ago when it comes to science. And in fact, the vast majority of Nobel Prize winners over the last 100 years have been Christians. Kind of eye-opening. And here's a 4th example of the hasty generalization. I've interacted with 7 Muslims on the web. All of them agreed that killing people in the name of God was justified to do it against non-Muslims. So, all Muslims are radical jihadists. Well, no. The numbers are way too small, and they're not randomly selected. They really don't support the generalized conclusion. So there are times where everybody generalizes each day. It's okay, but when it's done poorly, it can lead to some false conclusions, they point out. They quote philosopher Peter Kreeft, who says these generalizations, they said, that's the most common and simplest fallacy of induction, where you look at a few examples and come up with a conclusion. So they're saying you got to get in the habit of examining your generalized conclusions carefully. They probably come from non-representative samples, or at least they can. So you have to be really, really careful. You need a large sample size, but it's got to be random, and it's got to be representative. Okay, here's another fallacy. It's called the red herring. I guess supposedly it comes from the idea that if an escaped prisoner could find a really rank, pungent, dead fish, they would smear it along their path wherever they were and try to distract bloodhounds to get them to go away from them. So what the red herring fallacy does, it tries to shift attention to some side issue that's not really that important rather than addressing the central issue at hand. So it's trying to get away from the real issue to change the subject. So here's an example. Two people, and they're talking. First person says, if a divine mind exists beyond and in the creation of the universe, then the intelligible features of the cosmos would have a rational ground or justification. And arguer two does this response, yeah, but religious people are greedy hypocrites. Well, wait a minute. The issue originally was, can we have God being the ground for reason? And all of a sudden they're throwing charges of greed and hypocrisy. Do you see how that switched the topic? That's a red herring. Here's another example. Somebody says pro-life people often identify abortion as the death of the innocents, but what about the other issues that take life? You've got disease, you got starvation, you got warfare. Where's your pro-life protest about those issues? But you see, there's a change. It was supposed to be a pro-life argument, and now it ends up being an argument about warfare. So be careful, as they say here. So he says diversionary tactics. So just be aware that if others engage in them, you can just respectfully direct them back to the central issue. So we should be listening carefully to opposing arguments. And they said, do a diversionary check on your argument. Ask yourself, what's my central point of the argument? And can I repeat my opponent's argument? Is my argument or my critique of somebody else, their point, is that focused properly? Did I get off track? Can I identify where and how? Yeah, so those are all good questions I think we can ask. Here's another really popular fallacy. Boy, do we see this one a lot. It's called the straw man fallacy. So think about this. If you tell somebody, I'm going to go fight somebody, and they say, wow, are you sure? And you say, yeah, I can take them. So they follow you to see what's going on. And you end up in a field, and there's a straw dummy that's been set up to try to scare birds away. And you go up to say, watch this, and you throw a punch, and bam, it knocks that straw man down. And you pick him up, and you say, I can do it again. Well, what's your friend going to say? Hey, that's no big deal. You're not knocking down a real person. So this can happen when it comes to arguments. All right, so what happens? So somebody distorts the argument of his or her opponent and then criticizes that. All right, so that's a straw man. So it's either an exaggeration or maybe an oversimplification of somebody else's views or ideas. So it's wrong because it distorts the original argument to have to, to try to evade answering it. So it's a fallacy. So here's an example. The Trinity doctrine of historic Christianity constitutes tritheism, three gods. Well, no, that's not Trinitarian theology. What does the doctrine of the Trinity say? There is only one God, but he subsists as three distinct persons. So here's another example. Christians are racist, and the Christian religion is racist as well. I mean, think about all Christians in colonial America. They use the Bible to justify slavery. It's supposed to be a holy book, but it supports racial discrimination. How could any black person be a biblical Christian? And they said, of course, Christians are not immune to faulty thinking and immoral actions, but notice it's a straw man because it doesn't recognize it was Christian abolitionists that did use Bible teaching, that everybody was made in the image of God, and that was their argument to bring an end to slavery in the Western world. All right, so those are straw man arguments. So it's one of the most frequent ones. Yes, I would say that. And it's really easy to fall into that. Let me give one more example that wasn't in the book, but I hear this a lot. If somebody's talking about the age of the earth, and you say something about, well, I believe, God created and the earth has been here, some time, and your opponent says to you, well, why would we trust you? You're all Christians are young earthers, and it's easy to knock that down because science and physics and all say the universe has been here a long time. So what are they doing? They didn't really hear your view out. They put you in a position or in a camp that you're not in, the young earth view. There can be old earthers. There are all sorts of different views of how creation happened and how God brought this universe and brought the human race into being. And so for a person to put you into a category that you don't belong in and then try to defeat that, that's not fair, is it? All right, so that's the straw man. They have their own suggestions at the end of this. They said, we have a suggestion to help people stay on track. We suggest that each debater stop, take a deep breath, and then say something like this. Well, your central claim seems to be X, and your support for it seems to consist of whatever. Now, have I understood your argument correctly? If not, help me get it right. So that's really, really good. You want to repeat your opponent's argument clearly and carefully. Why? Well, it ensures that you're not committing the straw man fallacy. You're not attacking something that's not their position. And secondly, it lets people know that they've been heard, and they're happy that you understand their argument. And after all, you can only effectively critique an argument when you know what it says. And this helps your opponent understand you really do want to know truth. You don't just want to win an argument. So I think that's good. All right, so that was the end of chapter 9. Let's do a few more fallacies that he continues, two authors continue in chapter 10. This, unfortunately, we see this one a lot. It's called the appeal to force, threat, or the stick. That's another fallacy. See, a logical argument is supposed to persuade people because it's got reasonable support behind it. But what if you replace reason with force? And you're trying to get people to be afraid, right? It might be physical fear or psychological fear, and it's done in the form of some kind of pressure and intimidation. But the message is basically, accept my conclusion or else. All right, so it replaces rational support with a threat. So here's some examples. The United States should endorse the People's Republic of China's historic argument that Taiwan is part of China. If not, there will be severe political, economic, and military repercussions. So you can hear that. Endorse the People's Republic of China or else. How about this? You're one of the most scholarly and skilled philosophy professors at our school, but you must accept and abide by our new position at the university on race, gender, and class. If not, you'll be canceled. Right, there's the threat. How about this? If we can't persuade you to accept our political views through debate in Congress, then when we see members of your party in public, we're going to call on our followers to create a crowd and make it known that your views make you unwelcome in our society. Boy, is that a threat. Now, what advice do they offer? They say, well, don't be surprised. There are a lot of appeals to force out there. And why? Because they work. People know when they've been threatened, and sometimes they're cowed by it and they're afraid of it. They said, stay away in your arguments from any kind of intimidation. Don't mess around by trying to create fear. Let the power of reason do its work. Now, what if you're being threatened? Well, it says you'll see that the argument is basically at an end. So when you face the fallacy, challenge your opponent with this. Quote, other than the brutish threat, do you actually have any logical reasons for accepting your argument? End quote. Yeah, that's a good question, huh? So I like that one a lot. That's a really good one. Here's one. I see this in many places. It's the appeal to pity or misery. So what are you trying to do? You're trying to get somebody to change their viewpoint, but you don't have the evidence. You're just trying to arouse pity and sympathy. Now everybody wants to, we feel bad, we want to help people out, but that isn't really logically relevant to the conclusion of the argument. So, of course, as humans, we do have feelings, we do have passion. And sometimes they succeed, these kinds of arguments, because it touches something inside of us, deep inside of us. So here's some examples. It's true, I cheated on my business receipts, and I know it's worthy of termination, but if I'm fired, my children will go without food. Don't fire me. How about this one? God can't possibly exist. Look at the pain and suffering in the world. Here's a third one. Remember, the idea here is appealing to pity or misery. Here's a third one. If you oppose raising taxes, regardless of your reasons, you just don't care about the poor. Yeah, we're hearing things like that a lot. Here's a fourth one. Regardless of what the data shows, if you open the borders to immigrants, you don't care about the working poor in our own country. Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but you see that appeal again to pity or misery. So they say, having compassion is part of the Christian ethic of love, of course. It may not be logically relevant for an argument, but you still may want to think about how you could help that person in need. So we got to realize emotional appeals don't replace genuine evidence for the truth. But it's really hard when you hear something that evokes that kind of pity and misery. It kind of clouds our judgment. We feel terrible. So I said, probably a good thing to do is always acknowledge the feelings that are being expressed, whether it's sincere or not, but then address both the emotion and its logical irrelevance. I mean, pity is a good thing, but it's not really a substitute for argument. So I think that's good. Let's see, do we have time maybe for one more, two more? How about this? Called category mistake fallacy. Okay, so it's almost easier if I give you some examples. Here's an example. See why this is called a category mistake. Why can't God be seen? Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? God, by definition, is invisible. So that's a category mistake to say, isn't he like a light bulb or a chair or a clock? Well, he's not. So as J.P. Moreland said, a category fallacy is a mistake of ascribing the wrong feature to the wrong thing. So if you ask something like, how many inches long is the smell of a rose? That doesn't make any sense. They're in two different categories. Or what does the note C taste like? Right? So that's a category fallacy. Here's another one. If God created everything, then who created God? But the definition of the Judeo-Christian God is an uncreated creator. So he's uncreated. So that question is a category error. So they said, just be careful about things like that. They quote Norm Geisler. It's a category mistake to ask who made the unmade, right? Who made God? He's the unmade. Or who created the uncreated, right? So that makes sense. I'm going to skip ahead as we begin to end toward the back of the chapter. Oh, I like this one a lot. It's called the genetic fallacy. So it criticizes something because of its origin and disregards what it is right now. So it doesn't understand that things can change significantly, even and some things can be rational and true even if their source is questionable. So here are some examples. The scientific disciplines of astronomy and chemistry have deep roots in the occult and magical practices. Astronomy came out of astrology, chemistry came out of alchemy, so therefore modern astronomy and chemistry can't be trusted. Well, really? But it's changed over the years, over the centuries. These scientific disciplines are a lot different than they used to be. Here's another example. All of Christianity's major holidays, like Christmas and Lent and Easter, came from pagan superstitions, so they're unbiblical and ungodly. We shouldn't do that. Well, scholars now actually question the claim that Christianity's early celebrations are linked to paganism, but even if it was true, they say, then the Christians have changed the focus. They didn't have Christian ideas. It was a focus on Jesus Christ. How about this? Another example. Belief in God first arose from early humans' terror and anxiety of the natural world. So God was invented to comfort man from the fear of death. So fear and superstition were the source of humankind's belief in the divine. Well, first, that's an unproven assumption, and this projection idea insists human beings invented God. Well, is that true? No, we can think of a lot of reasons why that's not true. So let's do one last one here. Prejudicial language fallacy. A person substitutes emotional words instead of reason and evidence. Wow, we see a lot of that. How about this? Here's an example. People who deny the theory of evolution are just science deniers who are impossible to convince with reason. They're just like anti-vaxxers, flat earthers, and coronavirus truthers. Don't waste your arguments on them. So look at that language. It's pretty vicious language. Number 2, people who accept the theory of evolution don't do so based on reason. They don't think for themselves. They're just accepting the status quo. They're motivated by anything except genuine reason and evidence. Well, that's pretty prejudicial. So we have to be careful of inflammatory language. Okay. I'm going to do one more. Sorry, I thought I was done. But how about the slippery slope fallacy? Sometimes called the domino fallacy. You knock one domino over and they all start going down. Well, it says you as an argument gets going, you say there's an action, and it doesn't seem really big, but you say it's going to have a chain reaction of events that will lead to disastrous consequences. But the problem is there's not necessarily a good reason to believe that that will occur in that kind of sequence. So it's a series of intermediate steps that get more and more improbable. So here are some examples. If Gilbert doesn't pass his philosophy test tonight, he won't get a passing grade in philosophy. He won't get into a good university. And if he doesn't get into a good university, he won't get a good job. Then he won't get married. He won't be able to have a family. A poor grade on this test is going to ruin his life. Well, do you see they're taking something right now, something fairly small, not doing well on a test, and running it out into the future with all these maybes and ifs, and eventually you've finished him off, right? He has a terrible life. All right, here's another slippery slope. If same-sex marriage is legalized, then the next step will be polyamorous marriages, then marriages between adults and children. Finally, we're going to get humans marrying animals. We're back to Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, that took it pretty far, didn't it? Here's another one. If abortion on demand is allowed to stand, the next step will be legalizing abortion all the way up to birth. And then it'll be parents that'll have 2 years to decide if they want to kill their kid after the child's born. And the lives of special needs children are going to be extinguished. Here we go, brave new world, they say. Well, again, they're running this out to a distance that may or may not happen at all. So these are wonderful. I love the examples that they give in here, because they're examples that you run into, frankly, and at least variations of them. So nice book called Clear Thinking in a Messy World. I hope it encourages you to take a look at it. It has a lot of good chapters here. I just focused on the ones that I was interested in, but I will get around to reading the rest of it later. It's got chapters like Christianity and the life of the mind. Hey, there's a great concept, right? Christians should be thinkers. Laws of logic, why study logic? Yeah, how about evaluating propaganda and conspiracy theories? Are there conspiracy theories today? Oh, all over the place. I'll probably tackle that one the next time I do a podcast on this book. So a lot of wonderful material in there. Again, Ken Samples, always a careful thinker, and Mark Perez, the two of them are the authors. Well, thank you so much for being part of this podcast today. Take care, and hope the rest of your day is good.